Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is week 6 in xAPI cohort for the spring 2022 session. And I am super excited to bring you this week's speaker, Janet Effron, who's going to be talking about learning analytics and designing for data. So if you're at the point where you're thinking, what do I do with all this data? Today is your day. So I'm pretty excited about this. I met Janet, through xAPI cohorts years and years and years ago. We were trying to decide how long ago they were. Janet was actually involved with the first xAPI cohort that was run by ADL, or the Advanced Distributed Learning Group in the federal government. I joined in the third design cohort. So there is all sorts of really, really old time action going on here. So I'm pretty excited for this. I have some big news today, and we've got some great status updates from teams. So this is the, well, let's just get started. So let me share my screen here, and we are going to rock and roll. So week 6 today is being recorded, and so you may be watching this on the recording. Thank you very much for logging in and being here. And we can always catch up with these after cohort when Jamie sends out the weekly email. Let's take a look at xAPI cohort at a glance. We have, as of just a few moments ago, 800 people registered for the spring cohort this year, which is pretty amazing. And right now, this is the second largest cohort that we've ever had. This is actually a really active cohort from a team's perspective. So I'm very excited there too. This puts us right about midway in our 12-week xAPI cohort semester. So I am your host, Megan Torrance. I'm glad to have you back. Behind the scenes and making sure that everything works smoothly is Jamie Washington, paddling like a duck. In Slack and in the chat is Matt Cleaver, who is generally your guy for links and support and help. Although the cool thing about cohort is that the community helps. So instructional designer to instructional designer. What's really neat about building this learning community is that there's a size at which it becomes self-sustaining, and we've been there for a while. But it's really cool to just see people with questions and other people with answers. The xAPI Gnome is our Twitter account. The xAPI Gnome, his name is Bikey. He was the star of my first xAPI cohort project back in 2014, 2015-ish. So as a reminder for those of you working on projects or checking out things in the Slack channel, unless somebody states otherwise, all of our cohort projects are free, they're open source, there's no barriers to entry, and they all fall under the Apache 2.0 license, which in a nutshell, I'm not a lawyer, in a nutshell says you can't sue each other for bad ideas. So if you take something from here, you go and implement it, and it fails miserably in your environment, that you can't sue your teammates here for that. This week at cohort, like I said, we have Janet Effron, who's now at Notre Dame, doing some really, really cool learning stuff. And so Janet is also, where's my book? Where's my book? I had my copy. I think I must have loaned, I took my copy to Texas, didn't I? Anyways, Janet is the co-author of Investigating Performance, which is really, I consider that foundational book in using xAPI for learning analytics in our space. And it was absolutely ahead of its time, which means it's your time now to go and pick that book up. I'll see if I can find it while Janet is presenting. Today, so cohort teams, if you're presenting, this is your tech check. Go ahead and check your settings in AirMeet while you're listening to me talk about stuff you already know. If you're reporting out for your team, you've already heard what I'm about to say in the next couple of minutes. So make sure that you are good to go. When it comes to project updates, we'll just have you then raise your hand. That'll be after Janet's presentation. Welcome. Welcome to Cohort. I'll get you the book title in a moment, unless Amy or Matt Cleaver have it. It's Investigating Performance, but we'll get you the link. Welcome to Cohort. Because we know we have new people every week joining us, or this may be the first time you've ever joined in for the weekly web session, let's talk about what is Cohort. First and foremost, Cohort is a welcoming learning space for figuring things out and trying new things out. And so part of making that a welcome space to engage in is repeating some of the onboarding information so that if you are a newcomer, you can get in and you can get up to speed, thanks Matt, very, very quickly and not have those have that awkward period of not knowing what to do here last too long. xAPI Cohort is a free, virtual, vendor neutral, which means you can expect it not to be sold to. However, I will say it is vendor supported. And that means that you can expect, it's entirely possible, that the vendors of the tools that you use or people who know an awful lot about them are in the cohort and able to answer questions. And vendors have also provided a number of extended free trials and special offers for cohort members in order to support the learning community. So we thank you, vendors and providers who have made that possible for us. Cohort is a 12-week learning by doing project-based team learning experience and community. So let's talk about that learning by doing project-based team learning experience. That means that people are getting together, they're forming project teams. Project teams work in Slack, on Zoom sessions, in GitHub, whenever, wherever, asynchronously often, to form together around something that seems interesting and actually make something. It's a prototype. It's generally not a finished product by the end of 12 weeks, but they've made something or learned something or tested something or done something. It's really, really cool to see happen. It is a great way to learn. It's also, it provides a forum for watching and learning by observing. So you can absolutely learn by observing, showing up here for weekly web sessions, or observing what's going on in the project teams. These weekly web sessions, we follow an arc of a curriculum that I'll share with you in just a moment, and follow up every week with weekly email updates and web session recordings. It's possible that you got here to this session today without having signed in and signed up for Cohort. That means you're not getting the really valuable emails each week that include the session recordings, any additional materials and links, as well as heads up to events and things that are coming up afterwards. So let's talk about that curriculum. So here is our 12 weeks mapped out. We are solidly in the build and tune the ecosystem part of the curriculum. So we started out with, what is xAPI and how do I send the data? Now we're in the, how do I hold the data, manage the data, and use the data responsibly. So that's where we are today, and that will be Janet's session in just a moment. We also, have this purple bar on the right-hand side is describing what's going on with the project team. So there were a few weeks of just like coming up with ideas and making teams and trying to get people to join your team. We're now solidly in the design, build, get help, test, and repeat phase of Cohort. You can still start a new project team. Absolutely. This is also the time when some project teams will fizzle out a little bit, and that's totally normal and natural. Happens all the time. You all have day jobs, most of you, and just some ideas just don't get the traction, or you get attracted by something else somewhere else. So that's entirely normal. I wanted to call your attention to a couple of things down here at the bottom. We have 2 new items added to the schedule. First is April 21st at the Learning Solutions Conference in Orlando. So a live event. At DemoFest that the conference has all the time, there is a new category that we have worked with the Guild, the Learning Guild, to get added to the DemoFest programs, right, of personal projects. So this is a great place for cohort members or students or people just fooling around with something to submit a DemoFest entry at Learning Solutions Conference. I'm super excited about this. I've wanted something like this for years. So this is great. This means you can bring your half-baked, 3/4 of the way, still rough around the edges, using a free StormCloud LRS project to DemoFest, and you're not competing against the big hitters with big budgets that are doing full-fledged projects. So I'm actually super excited about this. And then May 6th is xAPI Party. And xAPI Party is actually a free online conference, but Party sounds like a lot more fun. And so that's really a celebration of all the work that gets done in cohort. We have a bunch of guest speakers. Last party, there was we had 2 tracks of content for a free day-long conference. So there's a Venn diagram between xAPI cohort and xAPI party. And so that's super awesome. The cool thing about xAPI party is that xAPI cohort project teams are all guaranteed a speaking and presentation spot in parties so that you can show off your work. And honestly, people care about the work that you are doing here. The work that you are doing here in cohort is creative stuff. It is interesting to people. The ADL pays attention to it. Companies who are looking to adopt xAPI pay attention to it. The vendors in this space pay attention to it because they care about what you are doing and experimenting and finding out. And people who are still sitting on the sidelines, not sure if xAPI is for them or why they would do it, they care about seeing your sessions. So well, you could probably pick up, I'm a huge proponent of xAPI Party and getting your stuff out there. It's also a really great professional development experience to be presenting at that. So without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage Janet, who's going to be talking about learning analytics and designing for data, because honestly, you can't just send a bunch of data and then figure out what you're doing with it. Did I just take like the entire punchline of your entire presentation?
No, I think you were just setting it up nicely.
I'm setting you up. I'm setting you up. All right, Janet, away.
Okay, yeah, and no, Meg and I were talking that I was in the first cohort, and I'm hearing the number of 800 people in this cohort, and I think the first cohort had maybe 25. And that includes people from ADL, that includes, people who were involved developing the spec. It was a really small group. We were just trying to get statements to send. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what we were doing with the data. But I'm a data nerd, so that's kind of where it evolved. But the thing that's, I think, changed a lot in those 10 years is that 10 years ago, if you'd go to a conference, well, obviously there wasn't anything about xAPI, but nobody wanted to talk about data. What was the point? And so I've seen a real evolution of what people know about data. So what I'd like to start with is, I should probably share my screen, I guess. That would probably be helpful.
It was really nice of me to stop sharing mine so you could. So.
There we go. It all works out. I think the first thing I'd like to do is just maybe ask people the question of how you would, and you can throw this into the chat or throw in emojis, if how would you describe your current use of learning data? Or and maybe it might be we're not, it might be we're very mature with it, it might be we're playing around with it. But if you want to throw that into the chat, that'll give me an idea of what I can speak to. Playing around with it. I think this is our life. Okay, this is good. So I went from a job where it was all data all the time. I was with H2 Labs at the time, was the company that developed Learning Locker, which is one of the learning record stores. So we ate, breathed, and slept data. I'm now with a smaller institute at the University of Notre Dame, where data isn't even like an afterthought. It's just like not something anybody had really been thinking about. So the first thing I did early on was I said, what can I do to show them the value of data? And this is nothing high tech. This is nothing xAPI. These are actually shrunken down Excel charts of participation data from 4 different courses. And I just put, if they completed a learning object, I gave it a 1, otherwise a 0. And I did conditional formatting. But it was a really useful thing because I could show people how people are navigating the courses, which, just knowing who completed what things is a little interesting, but it started bringing the questions that you want people to ask of, well, these people who kind of clearly persevered through the course, but didn't do everything, are they performing as well as the people who did everything? Because if they are, maybe we don't need all the stuff that's in the course. Or maybe some people need all the stuff that's in the course. And that's where your xAPI data is going to let you really think about how people are using the course, what good they're getting out of it. And the key thing here is by getting people to start thinking about data, then as we design further, you want to be thinking about data from the beginning of the course design process to make sure that the data design is aligned with the course goals, because you're going to be asking a lot of the same questions, whether, for your course goals as you are using for your data goals, because that's how you figure out if it worked. And the first thing you want to do is say, what do you want to do with your data? Usually the questions we look at are questions that have to do with participation or performance. I think participation is a little more familiar, especially when people are talking about, did they complete things? Did they get correct answers? But with xAPI, you can go a little deeper. You can start looking at how are people using the resources available, or are they using the resources available? How much time is it taking them? What things are proving useful to them? In cases where it's not a required completion of a course, what kinds of participation got people to go all the way through the course? And that helps you understand and design your courses better on the next iteration. But where xAPI, I think, really shines is in the performance-related questions, because if we take those participation questions and we dig deeper, are we teaching the right things? Does the course performance really have an impact on what happens in the job? Did the course make a difference? And to do this with xAPI, I think looking at the prior things, you've talked a little bit about this, about the data supply chain, that you have your activity providers, and then those activity providers and how they interface, they're going to be the systems architecture, and you need to be aware of that. And probably if you're working on projects, you're starting to get into that a little bit. The things I'm going to dig into a little more deeply, because I think that these are critical and often overlooked, are the issues of data management, ownership, and accessibility. Because when we start looking for data outside of the LMS, we're having to deal with a lot of people who are going to have different agendas, different concerns about their data. You're going to have data in all kinds of different situations. And you'll have some really interesting conversations about this. You will, even with the beauty of xAPI, not everything's going to integrate the same way. And so as you start looking at what you want to do and what it takes to get there, what we're going to talk through a little bit is how do you figure out what's good enough? Because you're never going to get everything you want. Or if you do, please tell me how you did it. Again, systems architecture is something I think that's pretty familiar. This is an example of a kind of a simplified example of a real life course where, we have an e-learning course and you get your standard LMS information and your LMS analytics, but then also looking at, okay, did we have job aids that are electronically available? Are people accessing them? Which ones are they accessing? Which, why, and that can tell you maybe what you need to get a little more detail on the course, or what things are just complex and people need a job aid for. And then in this case, it was a form that people had to fill out for a legal requirement, and saying, how are we doing? How are we making mistakes? Is the use of the course, is the use of the job aids actually improving performance? Because if not, we need to go back and do a redesign. And to me, this is the huge power of xAPI, is it's really telling us what happens. So to figure out what data we want, we've got to look at the data strategy, and the systems architecture and the integrations are kind of that technical side. And then content, we have to think about within the context of the technical data, what the course is teaching, what we need to know about the course, what activities within the course or outside of the course are going to provide measurable data. There's going to be a lot of data, but what's data that's actually going to tell you something you need to know? And then ultimately, when you get into analysis, you have to think about what can you act on, what should you act on? Because again, one of the really important things about data is data should always be forward-looking. It shouldn't be about telling us what happened. It should be telling us what to do next. We always want to be having data be a forward-living activity. It should inform our future decisions and actions. So when we're looking at our data strategy, one of the first things we want to think about is who are the players? Who are we talking to? Because we're not operating in the learning and development vacuum. And even in learning, we're not in a vacuum. But you need to have honest conversations with the data owners and the data customers. And that's something to think about. Is there the people who own the data? There are people who are going to be the customers of the data. That could be people in other parts of your company. That could be the learners themselves. That could be the instructional designers. So who owns the data? Who's going to be the customer of the data? And also think about who owns the learning and who's a customer of the learning. There are going to be more than one answer to those. And you need to talk to everybody in this scenario. Ideally, I've done workshops where we would have a whole bunch of people in the room and we talk about what the learning goals were, what the ways that you could measure, determine this was done, who owned what data, what was the accessibility of that data. Sometimes these were 2-day workshops, and for something that was a big enough concern for a company, that would be worthwhile. But you can also do this more informally. But the thing is, you have to look at the whole big picture. And then you have to look at the strategic goals. Why does this course exist? Informational needs, behavioral needs. Is it something part of a whole big change management activity? And that's going to tell you, again, what are the things that you need to be learning about the course? Again, this is about guiding those future decisions and actions from the data we collect. The third thing to keep in mind is there are going to be obstacles. You're going to run into data you can't access, maybe for privacy or security concerns, maybe because people don't want to play nice and share their data, and you don't have the political clout to get it. You may have data in really hard to access formats. You might say, we really need to see the historical data on this performance, but they just changed systems and you can't get the legacy data. There are going to be a lot of obstacles you run into. And you take those into account because you can work around them, but be aware of them going into the game. Because ultimately, when we collect data, we're looking at data that's observable, that's measurable, and there's something we can take action on. And to put it like in the stupidest 2x2 grid ever, but it's true. There's the data you can get. There's the data you can't get. There's what's not measurable. There's what's measurable. Generally, although not 100%, focus on the measurable. You could argue that I was at the Grand Haven, Michigan Lighthouse. I'm not sure. I grabbed that picture some years ago, but I think it's either there or it's on the Ohio, the coast of Ohio, someplace. Brian. But the thing is, occasionally we might say that qualitative data is not measurable. I guess we could debate that, but basically keeping that in mind. So if we think about what kinds of data we can get, you've got your standard SCORM and Google data, all the things people were talking about early on about how they use data, just your basic statistics. And as you guys have seen with xAPI, you can get a lot more information than this. And this is really, really where the power comes in. But it's also where the challenge comes in, because we can have all these terms, we can have these verbs, but what does attempted mean? What does completed mean? And I'm assuming in the cohort, you guys have talked a bit about that, of the need to define in your xAPI statements what it actually means to say somebody viewed a video. Was that that they just navigated to the video and hit play, that they watched at least 30 seconds, that they watched it and beginning to end, no scrubbing, those kinds of things. You need to know what the statements mean. And the other thing is, when you have all these opportunities, then you do have to plan a bit. And when I was doing early on some xAPI projects, this is what my Eventmatic thing looked like. It was a very high-tech operation, as you can see. me sitting on the floor of the home office with some screenshots of an app that was a student app for a consortium of universities that was going to try to help students who might be in some way at risk to help them be successful. And so it was looking at each screen of that app, saying which interactions of the screen provide significant data, what would be the verbs that would be used for those, and defining all the terms. And probably there are more elegant ways to do that process than this, but it's actually a really cheap way to do it, and a way that allows you to think it through. So you map this out, and then you start putting together your information of where your sources are and what your activities are going to be in your xAPI statements. And you have these conversations and you think them through. And I thought that was a Trello board for me. Yeah, it was a prehistoric Trello board. Document. This is one of the things that if you take anything away from this talk, take this away. Write down how you define things. Write down the decisions you made. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this. Careful documentation is your first step towards data stewardship. You have to know what transactions or activities lie beneath the data that you're generating, or you can't do meaningful analysis. Again, it's like that viewing the video, or what does a completion mean, or what does past mean? All of these things, and you'll have things outside of the LMS also that you have to say, what does this transaction mean in our Salesforce data or in our other data? You want this document to be clear and complete, because you're going to have to teach someone how to do it. And probably the someone you're going to have to teach is yourself 6 months from now. I promise you, you will not remember all of the decisions. However you want to record them, just do. And when everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge. One of the problems that in some of our early xAPI projects we ran into was that new verbs or new xAPI statements would be generated, and somebody had kind of just put together the recipe on their own and had not discussed with the group, and then nobody knew what this actually meant, or a verb was being used 2 different ways. So you need somebody to be in charge, and you need to record it. Again, this is boring, but massively, massively important for your sanity. And when you've thought about the data you're going to collect, and you've talked to your stakeholders, and you know why you're running the course, and you know how you can actually measure success in the course, then you need to take some time to evaluate your different activity providers. Remember those back in the data supply chain, and say, how much work is this going to be to get this data, and how badly do I need it? This is an example of a tool that we used some years back to say, when we had activity providers outside of the LMS, to say, okay, what's that xAPI integration going to look like? Does it already have the capability to output xAPI? It has an API, but it's not xAPI formatted, so we're going to have to do some work with that. We're going to have to do something custom. How much work is that going to be? And it's looking at the completeness and the configurability, and is there technical support available? And then the last thing is, how much is this tool going to help the data? So I'm ideally looking for my first things. I'm not going to necessarily be able to get all the data to start with if I don't have the buy-in. I want to get the easiest access with the greatest value. So for this is a real world case with kind of being anonymized, but of saying, in this case, we had a database we knew we were going to have to access. It was very hard to, in our initial conversations, to determine how complex it was going to be to do the data integration, but we knew that that data was critical. So basically, if we weren't going to be able to pull off that integration, it was a no-go. Then we had some other things that were high value and low to moderate efforts. You say, okay, our first pass, let's focus on the ones in green. Those are going to be, and I apologize, I did not format this for people with color blindness. That was stupid. but columns A through D would be ones we would focus on first, and then to say some of these other activity providers, to say, well, they're not really high value. We'll see if we need those or if we can get what we need to move forward with what we have. Because you're going to have a lot of available data, and you're going to have relevant data, and you're going for that intersection of the data that's going to be useful that you can get your hands on. And I'm gonna take a couple of minutes to just play around with the thought of data types, of quantitative and qualitative data, because this is where I am going to step back a little bit from the measurable, because this is not directly measurable, and yet it actually is when you get into qualitative data. So I guess the first question is, and again, I'll give a minute or two for people in the chat, is how do you collect qualitative data? Or do you collect qualitative data? Do you ever look at data outside of just the numeric data, the completions, the test scores, the participation data? Surveys, awesome. Surveys are great, but they're also a little bit fraught because, as my co-author Sean puts it, people lie on surveys, and a lot of times they lie not to be mean, but more to be nice. But surveys still can give you, and I've done a number of surveys too, they can give you some really useful information as long as you're taking them with a little bit of a grain of salt. Interviews can be great. Watching people actually use your course or do the activities that they're taking the course to improve in. Actually observing people is a great way to collect some qualitative data. But the thing is that quantitative data by itself only tells you so much. This was from a course that was given in a major hotel chain to frontline managers, and it was about improving the kinds of conversations they had with their direct reports. It was a voluntary course. I'm trying to recall now if there were 3,000 or 5,000 participants, but it was global. It was a pretty big course. I think it was about 3,000 participants. And it was done on a social learning platform. And the leadership of this organization basically every week wanted a 2-page PDF giving the things you would expect: time spent on site, completions, how many comments did people make, because they were not sure about the social learning. They thought it sounded a lot like Facebook. So they wanted to know that this was actually using people's time well and that people were participating. And we were able to show them, yeah, people were participating. There were more than 30,000 comments. There were, as you can see, there were 1,500 user-created videos uploaded. The logins per user increased over time. Time on site was solid. It was not dropping off. We were able to track what was the most popular content, what were the things that people kept going back to. And they were really, really happy about that. But the thing is, since I was living in the data, I knew that there was a lot more that they were not seeing, but that they didn't want to see. And I've talked to other people in other organizations that have had the same problem of, we have data and our leadership team doesn't think it's a value. They just want that bottom line set of numbers. So we had this 2-page PDF that we would have to send them every week with the data. But since this was a social learning platform, there was a lot, as you saw, there were a lot of comments. There were 30,000 of them. There was an upvote feature. So every week I would go through the top 50 to 100 upvoted comments on every topic in that week's course. And I'd grab some little excerpts from them and just would kind of put those in different places attractively on the PDFs of the reports to give a little context. And the leadership team started getting excited because the things people were saying were interesting. We're showing them how engaged the learners were. We're showing the real problems that were going on in the organization and where the solutions were coming from. And that got us some traction. And we said, will you let us take some time to dig a little deeper? And they said, yeah, okay. So what I did was I started going through some specific sets of comments every week. And I went through thousands upon thousands of comments and marked them a little bit of a variation on cognitive presence from Garrison's community of inquiry model. But basically, what it kind of, in simplest terms, spelled out to is that people would be reading or viewing a video, and in their comments, in the context of the comments, they'd be saying, hey, yeah, this was a nice video, I enjoyed it, this was good, to, oh, I learned this, I've never thought about this before. But we noticed that even like by the second week, people were saying, oh, this is a problem I actually have, and this solution might work. Next time this happens, I'll try this. And a few people said, oh, wow, I actually had this situation the day after I watched this video in class, and I tried this and it worked. By week 3, you can see we had 12% of the people in that course doing things differently. And we had another 53% who were saying, I can see where this will help me. I plan to use this in my practice. That was a really, really powerful thing to get out of the data. We were excited. The leadership team was excited. Everybody was happy. But the point is, it's good to know that a lot of people were participating. It's good to say, oh, wow, look at, these different regions. AMEA, I will tell you, loved this so much and we're super invested in participating, and say, okay, why was it resonating with them? Those things are good to know. But when you couple that with the qualitative data, then you actually get some meaningful information. And in my kind of closing bit of time in that organization, we actually, through the beauty of xAPI and other tools, actually developed a machine learning program that reasonably accurately could identify when people were having certain levels of comment quality, so that we could pretty quickly look at a course and say, okay, we should go and investigate these learning objects and look more deeply into these particular comments to say, why are people interested in this? What's the problem it's solving? That the organization might not even be aware that problem exists, or what's this really helping, that if I'm a manager, I want to know things that are helpful to my people. So it's a real goldmine of information for the organization as a whole, and not just about learning performance. And I think what that brings me to is analysis, which, as you collect your data, and I know you're going to have, I think Jason Haig is speaking next week, and he will tell you amazing and wonderful things because he's great. But this is one I pull out all the time. When you're going into analysis, it's very easy to use statistics for support rather than for illumination. And what do I mean by that? You can go into your analysis skewing your assessment. If you go in and say, did this course improve X? You're looking for data that demonstrates that it improved X. You're going to be looking for evidence that confirms your theory or confirms the answer to your question. So it's good to either have a little bit more agnostic questions, or to have, say, well, let's look, what other things could have happened? This could have improved. This could have gotten worse. And we also need to look at this in context of what does this mean? If I'm doing a course in some kind of compliance training, and then problem reports or error reports go up afterwards, that might not mean that the training was bad. That might mean that before the training, people didn't know they were doing it wrong. So you have to do your analysis in context and with an open mind. And one of the key things is the information you're getting diagnostic? Does it tell you something? Again, like that example of, if there are more error reports filed, that could be diagnostic of a couple of different things. So you need to find things that are actually going to confirm one thing or another. And I always use the analogy of health, that, if I'm trying to decide if what illness somebody has, well, if they've got a sore throat and a fever, that could be a whole host of things. If they've come up with spots all over, it's probably chickenpox and not the flu. So you have to find, evidence. Yes, it's going to support any number of situations, but especially as you're planning for your data, say, what's going to actually tell me differentially what happened, and not just evidence that could point to any number of scenarios. And I think at this point, I will wrap it up and see if anybody has any questions. And also invite Megan back if she would like to come back. And
I am coming back. All right. We do have some questions. That was awesome, by the way. That was awesome. And you're right, I do recognize some of those slides. I love the prehistoric Trello. That was well done. But I love just that map. And I did find my copy of the book. So it was on my pile of really good learning analytics books. So.
Yeah, and true story, I'm thinking, was that book like 6 years ago or something now?
2017.
Yeah, I mean, as we were writing it in 2016. And the thing is that then there was nothing. There was nothing on learning data. There was nothing on it. It's like, it's so exciting now that there's so much more going on, and just the maturity of people using data, not just xAPI data, but using data in general, that's just something people are comfortable with. Because, I mean, in that book, we're talking about just even like how to find centers in your data and how to find outliers, because nobody thought about that.
Yeah, no, it was all new. And I think, the learning space is relatively new to the data space. And this predated data profiles. Like, so everything was done the hard way. And
gosh.
Yes.
Yeah. You remember, like, I used to have that slide about don't collect everything. There was a reason for that. Because it's so hard to get stuff.
It is. I know, but I disagree. I like more data. So I've always,
and one thing that I did leave out that I do want to point out when you're doing you're talking to people about data, ask questions, and then when you're done, ask more questions. And I have a really good cautionary tale that's one example among many of where this would come up. They say, okay, so your data sources for this are this and this and this database where people do this and this and this. And I go back and say, okay, well, going back for the process you want to do you need historical data from that database you mentioned? And there's this pause. And then the person says, well, actually, nobody uses that database because it's too hard. So everybody just keeps things in spreadsheets on their own computers. So, and this is not an outlier. I will tell you, you will run into this. Fortune 100 companies to like the smallest mom and pop shop, it does not matter. This is why having the conversations face-to-face with people if possible, or at least several conversations on Zoom if you can't actually get in the same room with people right now. And really the same way that you're persistent in asking questions in your instructional design to understand why does this course need to exist and what's success look like at the end of the course, you need to understand how does this data exist and where is it really and what's its actual condition.
I had a client, we mapped out their ecosystem, and no kidding, it included Debbie's secret database. That's what it was called, Debbie's secret database. Okay, we've got some questions for you. First question has to do with the book. Is it still in print?
I don't know that it is, because that was what's Erin and Megan's.
It was the Making Better publication.
The Making Better publications, and I know that I don't think they're doing that anymore. If anybody really would like a copy, I could probably send Megan a PDF of the book.
Okay.
That you may just all have.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
Okay. And Megan, if I do not get that to you by the end of the day, please remind me, because there are a lot of fires being put out here right now. So when I get off this call, I'm going to be running and probably not stop for another few hours. So so if I forget, please do give me a nudge. But if I send you a copy, and then if anybody wants it, you can just punt it to them.
Okay, awesome. We can do that. Next question from Alana. Can you share an example of data that can be used to show performance improvement and how it was used?
I would use the example of kind of that diagram I had of that organization, that they had a situation where they had some significant compliance issues that were mission critical to the company. And part of it involved making sure that certain forms around some global transportation were filled out absolutely correctly. And so it was by being able to track people's engagement in the class and then saying how many times were they throwing errors on things. And then if we point them to that job aid, then do they stop getting it wrong after the job aid or not? So it was both showing performance improvement, and to me, the real beauty, as Megan's heard me say a million times about learning data, is it teaches us how to improve our courses. It teaches us where our courses are not doing what we think they are. And I hope that answers the question, but yeah, basically it's because you can pull things in from the world of performance. I've also seen some, I know we were piloting some things once upon a time with sales training and saying, having people do practice sales presentations with their line managers and then getting the data from the reviews on those, and then having some other data from actually field work and saying, okay, do we see over time that this performance has improved for people who have also engaged in these coaching sessions and these learning sessions? And one of the really important things, I think, when you're looking at improvement is you have to say, what's the cycle on it? Let's say you had an organization that spent a lot of time and money, small consultancy, doing sales training, because their consultants also basically did most of the selling because it was relationship based, and these were highly skilled professionals who had been doing this for years and had become consultants. And you did some sales training to help build their sales skills because their skills were in their professional field. And let's say you did this training, and then 6 months after the training, your sales dropped by 30%. Did the training fail? What if I tell you this was around 2008, 2009, when the economy crashed and all of their competitors were losing 50 to 70% of their sales? Also, maybe I have to look at, I train my salespeople, and if I'm Villeroy and Bosch selling China in a shop in Germany, there are probably going to be results in the next quarter or so. If I'm selling cars, maybe the same, but there's also going to be the seasonality of when cars are available, when new models come out, when people tend to buy cars. So I can't measure it on the same sales cycle as something else. There are some things in large industry, things like that. The sales cycle might be 2 to 3 years. Yeah. So I could do great sales training, and if I don't see results the next quarter, again, this is where you have to know all the context of your data, or you're not analyzing it well.
Yeah. No, that's huge, right? That business acumen piece in it. Okay, last question before, this is the funny one. Last question before we do team updates. How often are you asked if you have any relation to Zac Efron?
Quite often. And yes, indirectly or remotely. In truth. And actually, my son, who's close to the same age as Zac Efron, used to hear this question all the time from girls when he was. But yeah, no, all the Efrons, Zac Efron, Nora Efron, all come from about 3 small villages in Belarus. So if anybody's named Efron, no matter the spelling, there's like an extensive genealogy. And I don't want to know what distance of cousin, but yes.
Awesome. So your bacon rating is pretty high then.
Yeah.
Awesome. Janet, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming back to Cohort.
Well, thank you, Megan. It's always so nice to spend time with you.
So thank you for the offer of the book. And let's check out some team updates, everybody. Let's check out some team updates. So teams are doing their things, and this is pretty awesome. So those of you who will be giving your updates for your teams, go ahead and raise your hand so that when your team comes up, Jamie can bring you onto stage. So here's what we're going to do. And teams are, not only are teams still forming, you can still make a team now if you wanted to. But these are the teams. We're going to go in order, alphabetical order by project team. So I'm going to push the little hide. There we go. If you are looking for teams, you can just kind of hover over the channels there, and you get a little plus, and you just search for, they're in alphabetical order. You search for things that start with team. If it starts with Z, it's an old team that's been archived. Team CMI5 Create AU. This is one active team with 2 session updates. Is somebody coming on stage for this team? Ethan, are you there?
I am here. And so Hello again, everyone. Today I'm giving the current update for Team CMI5 Create AU, and we are working on a prototype desktop implementation of xAPI code a where we will build a app that can be made in live code that would be downloaded from an LMS, and then the assignable unit would be a desktop application that would send xAPI statements, and we will also be using the Catapult CTS player to test this. And so we're currently working on more features for this prototype application, including but not limited to how the application accesses the URL and the parameters it launches, as well as how they can be saved in connecting to the LRS. And you can help. We are still actively seeking members, including someone who has experience making Windows applications, who can figure out how to launch a app for that operating system using a custom scheme in a URL entered in the browser, as well as imaginative learning who can give us all sorts of ideas of what we could do with this technology. We are also still open to more project proposals and hope to see at least some of you next Monday from 4:30 p.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. for our next team meeting. Thanks and have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, Ethan. All right, so this team could use some learning designers and some app designers. So very cool. Team Data Analytics. Brian, are you there?
I am here. Hello. It was a slow week for us this past week, but we're getting some momentum going. For next week, we got our LRS set up with Veracity, and then are scheduling a meeting actually this Saturday afternoon to start doing a lot of what Janet was actually talking about today. So perfect timing for us to start planning out some of the data that we want to create and then build, and then ultimately for our final goal, of course, analyze with some data analytics tools, but are really doing the planning process this Saturday about what are all of those statements going to be that we're going to pull in and how are we going to use them.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. That's Team Data Analytics with a very timely session or update. Team Free Code Camp. They have a Slack update. I don't think anybody is here from Team Code Camp, but they are finding their code database, and what they want to do is evaluate a learner's solution to a coding challenge and store that with xAPI. So that is going to be pretty darn cool. They apparently have a goddess of debugging, which I think every team should have a goddess of debugging, which is pretty amazing. And they're going to start getting some test statements to the LRS. If you would like to join them and the goddess of debugging, they will be meeting on Friday at 5:30 Eastern, and there's details about that in the Free Code Camp Slack channel. Team H5P, I believe I'm giving their update also. They are looking at doing some really interesting things. They also found a downloadable, a desktop-based H5P authoring platform. So they were pretty stoked for that and looking at adding different content types that are easy and cheap to create and edit. So super cool there. Nicholas Chan, it is very, very early in the morning for him right now. So the team LTEM is, their goal is to build some storyline quizzes and branching scenarios that will all trigger xAPI statements and then use Will Telheimer's learning transfer evaluation model, or LTEM, to evaluate different levels of the data, which kind of gets in a little bit to some of the stuff Janet was talking about today. So they're also looking at some alternative LRS providers and other options. So very cool stuff going on there. Mary Elizabeth, are you there for Team More Than SCORM, or is somebody there from Team More Than SCORM? I know this team doesn't meet until like right before cohort, so getting an updated answer is a little tricky.
Yep, we've got
Oh, Toya.
coming on. Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
We sure can, Toya. Welcome.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. So we've created a basic storyline test file that does have a quiz question. We've got that pointed to our test LRS, and we've reviewed some of the data that we've received so far. We basically create an outline for a simulation as well to be able to test the questions that we're curious about. For this week, we're going to continue adding elements to our storyline file and then continue building out the simulation that we want to test as well. As we are testing, we're looking at how our storyline file behaves when it's launched from an LMS, and also how a RISE course launched from an LMS can send xAPI data as well, and then figuring out how we can get our storyline file on GitHub. So if anybody has experience with that, we would appreciate some help there.
I think you will find some help there. So awesome. So Toya, thank you. Thank you for giving your first update at cohort. And this team is doing some very cool stuff. Team Personalized Learning, I did not get an update from them, nor from Team Storyline Beginner. Bring your own project. But we have last week's update from the Unreal Engine. They're looking at being able to create a character and then be able to track how people interact with that character and what happens within that scene, and get that data out of Unreal and over to the LRS. And then Mark Cafuso is on to tell us about what's going on with Team xAPI developer tools.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, I consider my team lead the goddess of debugging, but for Free Code Camp, I will allow it. And I'd also like to know if this person has an hourly rate. That would be very good to know. Anyway, so for Team xAPI developer tools, we've been having some conversations and brainstorming. That's really the phase of the project that we're in. We've had some very, very good questions being asked, and we're just talking about what a developer tool is and how we can work together. No scheduled team meeting yet, because every time I send a message to channel, it's across like 12 time zones. So that's not really an option. So I've just put the question out there whether we should meet asynchronously or not. But shout outs to Matthew Cleaver for his help getting the GitHub team all set up. We're all, that's all rolling along. That's great. Mary Elizabeth Mitchell for her very insightful questions, Joan Davis, and a number of others, including I have met the duck. I have met Brian Duck. And if I even got the whole "if it quacks like a duck" joke off the ground, that was great. I thought that was a very excellent conversation. And we were just talking about a number of things, and I saw just how active he's been in GitHub. So I think we're really moving along here, and I hope to even be able to demo. I don't know if that's a possibility, but be able to demo some things that we're working on. And I just having got the GitHub set up, then I think we'll move into really seeing who wants to work on what and getting involved together as a team.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So great work, team. Thank you, Mark. That's pretty awesome. And then Team xAPI Learner Profile. I know Khalid's working on trying to get a group together for that action. As we close things down today, some things that are good to know. It is never too late to join. Invite your colleagues and your network to sign up at xapicohort.com. You can follow the Gnome for reminders and updates. Our weekly web sessions are 2 to 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern time on Thursdays. I should probably write that that's Thursday. New dates for your calendar. Whoop, whoop, whoop. New dates for your calendar. May 6th is the xAPI party. that will be right here on AirMeet, and we would love to have these teams give demos. And Demo Fest, I think demo is going to be the operative word here. Demo Fest at Learning Solutions Conference will be April 21st. Note you have to be a full paid attendee of Learning Solutions in order to be a presenter at Demo Fest. So, and I believe I have, oh, Jamie, we've got a $50 off coupon, and there's still an early bird registration for Learning Solutions. Let's put that in the weekly web session or weekly email that goes out so that everybody has that information and can get in on that. If you need anything between now and next Thursday, you can email us at xapicohort@torrancelearning.com, or you can just find Jamie, Matt, or I in the Slack. If you need something generic, go right ahead and just put it out there on the main channel, and somebody will answer your question. It's pretty much magical. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week, and go out there and make something cool. Martin, we could put a link in the email to the Learning Solutions Conference. However, it is a fully live conference, not an online. All right. Have a great week, everybody.